In our last lesson, we discussed Hitler's racial ideology at great length. We learned how Hitler believed that the German Aryans were at the top of all races, which was why they were supposed to dominate and populate not just Germany but several parts of Europe. We also learned about how he had actually divided the German population into the desirables and the undesirables. Now, among the various categories that were clubbed together as the undesirables and that were horribly persecuted in Nazi Germany, the Jews were the worst hit. And this kind of discrimination towards Jews, this kind of hatred against Jews is known as anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a form of racism that refers to hostility to, prejudice towards, or discrimination against Jews. And this was what was happening at large during the Nazi rule. But before understanding this concept of anti-Semitism and its reasons properly, we should know who these Jews are. The Jews are an ethno-religious group originating from current-day Israel. This map here shows you the present-day West Asian nation, that is Israel. And the Jews are an ethno-religious group. That is to say, they are an ethnic community and a religious group who hail from Israel. And they traditionally practice Judaism. But anti-Semitism isn't an idea that was put forward by Hitler. In fact, Europe has witnessed anti-Semitism for several centuries. And you will be surprised to know that anti-Semitism actually prevailed and spread among the Europeans because of religious reasons. What do you think those religious reasons are? Well, the reason behind the death of Christ is a matter of contention in Christianity. But traditionally, Christians are of the opinion that the Jews are responsible for the death of Christ. Now, till a century or so ago, Europe was largely dominated by the Christians. And the Christians are the ones who held the Jews responsible for the death of Christ. And it is for this reason, for this religious reason, that anti-Semitic tendencies and feelings kept on spreading among them. And this illustration here also emphasizes the same point. Here, Christ is looking from the heaven and is looking over a group of Christians who are avenging the death of Christ. So the Jews are being persecuted by the Christians because they are held responsible for the death of Christ. Now, before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. Religion did not play any role behind the spread of anti-Semitism among the Europeans. Do you think this statement is true or false? Well, the correct answer is that this statement is false. Because just a while ago we learned that the Christians traditionally held the Jews responsible for the death of Christ, and it is this religious reason that actually provided impetus to the spread of anti-Semitic tendencies among the Europeans. This illustration here also shows you the same, how the Jews were treated with suspicion in Christian societies. Here it reads, Christians only, Jews not allowed. The Jews were not allowed to undertake several kinds of activities in Christian societies. Until medieval times, these anti-Semitic tendencies kept on increasing in the minds of the Europeans, and the Jews were forbidden to own lands. They had to sustain themselves by trading and money lending. And for this reason, the Jews were called the usurers. Why were they called the usurers? Now, a usurer is a person who lends money at exceptionally high interest. And because the Jews had to sustain themselves by trading and money lending, In traditional Christian societies until medieval times, they were termed the usurers. That is to say, they were actually extorting money from the Europeans. Now, they were also treated with suspicion for another reason. Now, the kings in the European monarchies, in the European kingdoms, were afraid of the Jews, because the Jews were the ones who had access to money, because they performed trade activities, because they lent money to people. Now the kings thought that if the Jews got access to more and more money and resources, and mind you, the Jews were a minority group in Europe, the kings now were fearing that they will start extorting money from the majority groups. That is to say, the kings were afraid of being exploited by the Jews, which is why the Jews were treated with suspicion in Christian societies. I'm sure many of you might be familiar with William Shakespeare's very famous play that is known as The Merchant of Venice. In The Merchant of Venice, the villain is Shylock, who is a Jewish moneylender. Throughout the text prevails many Jewish stereotypes that he was actually extorting money from people. He was actually a ruthless moneylender. Well, this was the extent to which stereotypes against the Jews, to which hatred against the Jews prevailed in the minds of the European masses. Over the years, the Europeans now realized that they can use the Jews as the scapegoats. What does this mean? This means that the Europeans held the Jews responsible for any misfortunate thing that happened in the society. Be that a war, a famine, a plague, an endemic, or any kind of sorry state of affair that happened in Europe, it was actually attributed to the Jews. In fact, unfortunately enough, the Jews were persecuted for the alleged blame on them for causing the Black Death plague. So suspicion of the Jews, hatred against them, prejudices against them suffused the minds of the Europeans. And this was how Hitler now turned this to a full-fledged anti-Semitic propaganda in Nazi Germany. We learned that various groups of people were clubbed as undesirables by Hitler in Nazi Germany, but it were the Jews who were the worst hit. Firstly, there were many stereotypes against the Jews because of a religious reason, that they were held responsible for the death of Christ. And Hitler was able to exploit the minds of the Germans. He was able to turn the Germans against the Jews. And this is how his racial ideology was actually founded on an anti-Semitic propaganda. Anti-Semitism in Hitler's Germany reached such an abnormal extent that Hitler posited that there was actually no solution to the Jewish problem. What was this Jewish problem? The Jews were considered racially inferior, absolutely subhuman by Hitler. And he believed that the Jews were there to taint and corrupt the sanctity and purity of the Germans. Which is why he believed that they were a problem in the society. But there was only one solution to get rid of this problem. And this solution was the Jews' complete elimination, as Hitler posited. So this is the reason why the Jews were the worst hit, the worst persecuted group in Nazi Germany. This lesson introduced us to a very new concept, which is that of anti-Semitism. We learned how anti-Semitism is entrenched in religious reasons because we learned how, traditionally speaking, the Christians held the Jews responsible for the death of Christ. They believed that the Jews had actually betrayed Christ, which is why he was killed. And then we also learnt about how the stereotypes and hatred against the Jews kept on spreading among the Europeans. And Hitler, very cleverly enough, maneuvered this negative sentiment against the Jews into a full-fledged anti-Semitic propaganda in Nazi Germany. Well, having learned about this anti-Semitic propaganda, in our subsequent lesson we will learn how these Jews met horrible deaths in Nazi Germany. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.